Okay, good afternoon, everyone. It is noon, and this is the Planning, Housing, Economic Development Committee. November 18th, we're taking up two items. First is interviews for the Bethesda Urban Partnership Board of Directors, and then the second is a continuation of the MOVE program, review of our economic development programs. We will try to be expeditious today. We have a joint committee meeting at 1:30 on a pretty technical and intensive topic, so want to leave a little bit of time in between these two meetings for something to eat and any final discussions there. So without further ado, Ms. Singleton, welcome. Why don't you please tee us up for our interviews with our applicants for BUP?
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Reamer. So we have three applicants for the BUP Board of Directors: Ms. Lefkowitz, Mr. Aberlee, I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly, and Mr. Schlaff. And this will be a panel interview, and I believe you have the questions in front of you.
I do. Thank you so much. So we'll ask, let me see if my settings are correct. I'm not sure if all of our guests have their cameras on. They do. Great. Okay. Super. Well, welcome. Thanks for volunteering to serve on the BUP's board. And each of you has a very compelling, intriguing history of involvement on issues that are very relevant to BUP. And we're all very proud of that organization and think it's making great contributions to the success of Bethesda. So why don't we invite our guests to respond, our applicants to respond via the questions that we've prepared. And I will start in alphabetical order and then reverse the order and then start in the middle. And then the last one will be a very pro forma question. So first question is, why do you want to become a member of the Bethesda Urban Partnership Board of Directors? And I believe the first respondent would be Ms. Lefkowitz.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm very excited to be here. I love Bethesda. That's sort of the baseline, the foundation for why I would want to serve on the board. I've lived in Bethesda for more than 20 years. And when I graduated from college back in the 1900s, my goal was to move to Bethesda and be a resident of Bethesda. Lived as a renter for a bunch of years and then bought a condo. And I just love this little city. I think it's a beautiful little town. I have a great sense of community here. I got involved with Bethesda through Bethesda Transportation Solutions a bunch of years ago and was on the board, on the advisory committee, from 2007 to 2013, served as chair. And then my term ended, life got very busy. I was a corporate person who worked 80 to 100 hours a week and wasn't able to volunteer my time in the way that I wanted to. And now, as of July of this year, I'm a full-time entrepreneur, business owner, and living and working in Bethesda. And I now have more time and space to serve the community again. And I care a lot about Bethesda. I could never leave the walls of Bethesda and be happy, homebody. And I have a lot to give. I have a lot to contribute. And with more time on my hands and more control over my schedule, my first thought was actually, how can I serve really locally? And then this opportunity popped up. And so I'm excited to pursue it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Mr. Oberle.
Thank you. Thank you to the board, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak here. And I also want to say good luck to the other candidates. Hopefully we'll all do well today. To answer the question, it's probably going to echo a lot of what Ms. Lefkowitz said, but this is my community. I live here. I plan to be here indefinitely. I really admire the vision that's occurring for Bethesda as a city in its own right. It's not a suburb. It's not a commuter stop on the Metro Red Line. You know, I can't say it in any better way than a city in its own right, a destination for people to come to. I think that's an exciting that would be an exciting work to be part of. If I could help shepherd this community into a long-term, livable, workable, nice place, that would be very exciting. And just to go overboard a little bit, if I could somehow take part in work that would help the community have something that it could build on into the coming century, that would just be an honor. So that's what excites me about this opportunity.
Excellent. Thank you. Mr. Schlaff.
Good afternoon, and thank you again for the opportunity to meet with you all today. So I have not as much history in Bethesda. I've lived in this community for about 5 years, though my wife and then her parents before her are actually Bethesda natives. So through my family, I have a long history here. And I also have a daughter who's going to be turning 2 in December, and feel really privileged and blessed to live in this community. I think it's just a fantastic city, as Mr. Owerly was saying, that has so many assets and resources. And I'm really interested in making the most out of that community for my daughter as she grows up here. I'm really interested in seeing how we can merge all of the community assets and sense of belonging and place that we have with what is becoming, I think, a truly magnetic destination, like urban downtown. And, you know, as we're part of this greater Washington region that has so much going on in so many ways, shapes, and form, I think it really matters to Bethesda that we make the downtown area like the most magnetic area within that region. I think there is so much that's currently underway with the building that's going on, the transit and active transportation that's coming in, the community programming taking place there. And I think there's just so much more opportunity to build on that on an ongoing basis so that, you know, both my daughter and every member of this community has this growing, rich place to enjoy, to thrive in the coming years, and to get involved in some way in my community, bring a little bit of my expertise that I have through my career to help shape that in any way, shape, and form would be a true privilege. So that's why I'm interested in serving on the board.
Super. Thank you. Okay, we'll continue with you, Mr. Schlaff. Next question. What in your background qualifies you to serve on the board?
Sure. So I've had this, what I think of as very fun career at the intersection of sort of transportation and urban development. In my day job right now, I actually work with municipal government and transportation authority leaders really around the world to build the future of public transit. My company provides transit to public entities to reshape communities in all ways, shapes, and forms to make them more sort of sustainable, livable, increase access to opportunity. Before that, I was a consultant to the private and public sectors around the same theme of emerging mobility and transportation. And then even before that, I was actually a urban policy and social innovation researcher, looking at ways to increase sort of, urban development, economic development for low-income communities. And so I've had this fun sort of, meandering career looking at all the intersections of how do you create healthy, sustainable urban systems that can thrive over time and make use of, both like really smart policy, but also new technologies and bringing the business community. And I think what's really fun about my career right now is that I have this front row seat to the emerging area of economic development and urban development around the world. So we work with, some of the largest, most innovative cities around the world to very small rural communities throughout the US who are all thinking about how to create the communities of the future. And one thing I think I can bring to the board is both being, a member of the community, right? Someone who knows what's going on here, who's invested in the future of this community, with that front row seat and a global perspective on what's going on in communities around the world to create healthy, thriving urban systems. And I think, the board is currently constituted, has so much fantastic local expertise that I'm excited to learn from. But I think I might bring more of that global perspective of what's going on elsewhere that can maybe help inform some initiatives and some programs and things that we as a community could invest in. So that's what I'm excited to bring to the board's work.
Thank you. Mr. Oberle.
Sorry about that. I want to answer that question. I'm going to do it in 3 parts, and I'm going to sort of drill down. The easiest, why am I qualified to work on a board like this? My career, which has been, I'm a reporter, but much of my career has been covering government and quasi-government organizations. And so I understand how they work. I've worked with them. I get the challenges that these types of organizations have to work under, balancing competing stakeholders, working within resource limitations, which can be very frustrating. the value of the procedural guardrails to protect the rights and so forth of everybody who's affected. I get that. So to move on, this position that I'm applying for, a community representative. My skills are a reporter's skills. I know how to get out there, learn views and facts, and to condense them and to bring them back and well, report on them. And I believe that cannot be a passive activity. That has to be an active activity. You can't just sit back and try to absorb what the community wants. You got to get out there. Otherwise, you get the angry people, the vocal people, the people with agendas, and you get a skewed sample. So that raises the question of how you do that. Some ideas that have popped in my head are canvassing, going around the neighborhoods, talking to people, surveys, going to the various Bethesda events and setting up a table, stuff like that. Whatever it would be, it would have to be, within the confines of what the board needs, what the board wants. It would be discussed with the board and so forth. I certainly would not want to step on any toes, but what I would like to do is be a conduit between the board and the community that I represent. And the final thing is my personality. I show up. I keep churning. That's what I do. That's why I've had success in my life. That's why I have my own business. I think I'm innovative and adaptive. If you guys refer to my cover letter, when I applied the story about, my wife and I had the voter registration booth that during the pandemic we adapted into a voter information booth because no one was sure how we were going to vote. And I'm also an even-tempered guy. I'm a cooperative guy. I play well with others, so I think that I would be an asset to the board, and I think that I would work well within the board.
Thank you so much. Ms. Lefkowitz.
Thank you. I think there are a couple of things that will be an asset to the board. One is my business background. I am historically an HR professional, worked in human resources for 20 years, interim managed a whole bunch of different departments throughout my career, finance, marketing, et cetera. And what that tells you about me is that I'm a doer. I'm a problem solver. I'm a fixer. I'm a person who will reach out, raise my hand, say yes, be on board. And I'm also scrappy. I fight for things. I fight for justice. I have a really good eye for what is going to be best for a company or an organization and a community or a set of employees. And I will stand for both sides and really look for solutions that serve everybody. A number of years ago, there was a situation where there were going to be meters, parking meters put on the block that I live on, which is a residential block. And I reached out and spoke to people about it. I spoke to BUP about it, and I spoke to, I wrote a letter to the county about it, and talked to my neighbors. And I put together a petition and a compelling letter, and parking meters were not put on our block. That's just a small sort of tiny corner of Bethesda, but it's indicative that it was something all the neighbors were talking about. And I was the one who stood up and said, well, let's look at this. And so with me on the board, you would have a doer, an idea person, a person focused on balance and service to the community and the organization and the government, and a person who is willing to just dig in and be there.
Excellent. Okay, Mr. Oberle, your question is, what are the issues most impacting Bethesda that you believe the board should address?
I think that it's a issue that the board is addressing well, but it's mobility, and by mobility I mean everything from cars to pedestrians to even people sitting at a table, people who aren't mobile, and how that interacts with profitable and pleasant spaces for the people there. And like I said, I think the direction is great, but I did a deep dive into some of the documents that are available online, the 2017 downtown plan, the BUP 5-year plan. I looked at the most recent monitoring report, and I looked at the Norfolk. I just chose the Norfolk streetscape plans, and I liked what I saw, the use of innovative curbing, and I really like the idea, the interim idea of parklets. I think there's a lot of opportunity for the board to play around with that, and I'm excited about hopefully the expanded civic green up by Veterans Park, and the plans for the redesign at Woodmont and Norfolk. And so we need to look where would the board take that in the future. And one of the things we can look back at is the pandemic. The streeteries, and one of which was in Norfolk, I thought were great successes. One of the reasons that they were successes outside of the whole issue of the pandemic and people needing to be outside is that they were plazas that were where the people brought the people to the businesses, not just near the businesses, but to the businesses. And so the Norfolk plan has a lot of opportunities in there for that. I think that the idea of the setbacks on the frontages, and hopefully that, that's, you've got roof space that you could use for a lot of more space for people. You could maybe encourage the character of that neighborhood with building alcoves. You know how people use a lot of businesses have taken what I think were driveways along Cordell and St. Elmo and Auburn and turn those into eating areas or some sort of usable space. Is that something that you could expand the human space along that corridor and all the other corridors, the Battery and over on the other side of town and everything? I think that would be a very useful thing. Of course, that's infrastructure. So what could the BUP do in that aspect once that infrastructure is in place and once the board is encouraged through the county, that kind of neighborhood? One idea that came to me I was actually walking down Norfolk today on my way to work, and use those spaces to actively draw people to the community, make people from outside the community see how it's a great space, maybe have a series of events that highlight the diversity of Montgomery County, maybe linked up with the various national celebrations and so forth. Bring in arts, bring in music, bring in workshops, but use the infrastructure to help highlight Bethesda as a welcoming, vibrant community.
Thank you. I think Ms. Lefkowitz, you're next.
Yeah, thanks. I love how the board functions now. I love the collaborative partnership between local government and Bethesda Urban Partnership, and the sort of private-public marrying of getting the work done. What I love about Bethesda is a little bit what Mr. Oberle talked about, which is that it's just this really welcoming, really creative, really beautiful little city. And I see from my friends and family who want to come to town a little bit of resistance because of the ability to get into Bethesda and find a place to park and find a place to be, and construction that cuts off lanes and all that sort of stuff, and the pedestrian aspect, which I have seen get better, especially over the last few years. I love the intersections where all of the walk signs come on at once, and I have seen the way that the streets are structured slow down the drivers so that the pedestrians can walk around. What I see in opportunity is such a great opportunity to keep improving that, to keep improving the ability for walking and biking and strollers and hanging out and getting from one side of Bethesda to the other, so that it's easy to enjoy all of the arts and entertainment. And it's easy to say like, hey, there's going to be a concert this afternoon. You want to come and sit outside with me and hang out, and not have the first reaction be, well, where will I park? How will I get there? And so for me, that's such an opportunity to help people understand that it is actually really easy to get to Bethesda. And if you park in one of the less crowded garages, the circulator is there for you. And the pedestrian access has gotten so much better. And so I think there's such a great marketing and communication opportunity to highlight what changes have been made so that people want to come here and want to be here. And I would love to be part of that.
Thank you. Mr. Schlaff.
So, I mean, I would certainly echo just about everything my fellow candidates said. I think is really great, worthwhile initiatives. My perspective on this is that I don't think anyone would dispute that Bethesda is an absolutely incredible place to live. And I feel truly privileged and blessed to live here. It really is arguably hard to beat, I would say. I think the question is, for an issue facing Bethesda, is how do we also make downtown Bethesda a phenomenal place to work? And I think there is so much already going on that is addressing that and building that. And I think, among other things, all of the housing development that's taking place to bring more residential units online in downtown to build up that density around, a transit-rich area is absolutely essential work and should continue. But I think as we look around the greater region of the county and also the greater Washington region, we want to think about how you build on a dense urban environment like that to truly make it a desirable place to work, so that we are bringing all of the talent and the energy, not just from Bethesda and not just from the county, but the region, to that downtown to make it in the most dynamic and thriving area and community that it can be. And I think there's sort of a couple ways to look at that. One is obviously, how do we continue to attract employers to come to downtown and set up their offices and bring jobs to it? I think hopefully building on Marriott's presence downtown will be a way to do that. But also, if you think about the shift to remote and virtual work, right, that's been catalyzed by the COVID pandemic, you have to think about ways to attract people to come and work and spend their time there who might not necessarily be tied to their employer in that location. And then building on that, how do you then as a community draw benefit from attracting those sort of remote workers, which I think will be a sort of increasing category of remote and sort of hybrid work. And so I think we want to build on what makes this place so incredible to live, and also make that downtown area specifically an incredible place to work, because as we think of Bethesda as a city, you just want kinetic energy. You want people moving about their day, going to dine, going to meet, going to work, and then bumping into each other, really, to create more of an interesting community. And I think building on things like the streetery, the amount of active transportation and infrastructure development that's going on, how do you build on that and think about that from a work perspective? How do you increasingly support people to come there and work and interact and invest in other ways in that downtown area? And again, that's so much of the work that the county council is obviously focused on. And the BUP only touches that in so many ways, but I think there's a lot of initiatives that the BUP board specifically could sort of advance to build on all of that work and make it a great place to work as well downtown.
Thank you. All right, Mr. Schlaff, will you be able to make the time commitment that the board requires?
I definitely will. Speaking of remote work, I'm one of those people who's been lucky enough to be able to work from home. I'm within, a quick walk or bike ride of downtown, and making the board's hours will not be any issue for me.
Mr. Oberly, would you be able to make the time commitment that the board requires?
Yes, easily. I live here, I work here, I walk to work across up Norfolk Avenue. I'm my own boss. My time flexibility is maximum, no problem.
And Ms. Lefkowitz, would you be able to make the time commitment?
I'm so pleased to say yes, that I will. And that with my current work situation and my future work situation, I can prioritize my schedule and my life in exactly the way that I want to. And that not only will I be available for the requirements, but also for the ability to hand raise and contribute as much as I can.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Great interviews, great candidates. It is sad that we can only name one of you, and each of you has been a community leader in different ways, and we will rely on you to continue to do that. And if this isn't the opportunity that lands this time, we hope you'll pursue the next one, because now that we've seen you even closer, I think we're all really impressed. So thank you so much. Great questions, great interview.
I'll see each of you around the neighborhood since you all are very close to me, and I'm walking around the neighborhood quite a bit as well. So thanks for your service and your interest in serving. And just here to the chair's comment of this isn't the opportunity. There certainly is another opportunity right behind it.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. And
Thank you.
we will be in touch soon. Our council clerk will be in touch. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Have a great day. Okay, our next item is Councilmember Joando let me know that he had a 12:30 commitment. So he will not be joining us for this next piece. The next item is the continuing review of our Economic Development Fund programs, and specifically the MOVE program. And why don't I turn it right to you, Gene, and let's get right to it.
Very good. Thank you. Excuse me, Mr. Reamer. The committee did review the Economic Development Fund grant and loan program and was planned to review the MOVE program on November 8th, but this one was continued, as you said. And so I'll just jump through the packet. It was a republication of what was in the first packet and go through some of the high points, and then I'll leave it up to the remaining committee members for discussion. I'm also joined, obviously, by our colleagues at the executive side, Ms. Boyer and Mr. McGinnity, and then we're also joined with our colleagues from the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation. So the MOVE program will be the first program the committee will look at that is not in county code. EDF subprograms can be in county code, don't have to be. They can be simply funded through an appropriation. And so the MOVE program is one of the latter programs. It was first envisioned and created by the Department of Economic Development in 2014 as a program to address office vacancy, specifically Class A and Class B office vacancy in the county, as well as to provide a small grant program for attracting businesses to the county to help offset relocation costs in the first year. The program provides an $8 per square foot based on the actual lease signed. There are only a few criteria, and those criteria have changed a little bit. I'll highlight what was originally the criteria and where we are now. So previously, at least in the initial review of the MOVE program, the criteria required that the businesses be in certain industries such as IT, life sciences, cybersecurity, so the county's strategic industries as identified by the Department of Economic Development, excuse me, in 2014. The businesses need to have signed their first lease in the county, and then the lease needed to be at least for 3 years in either a Class A or Class B office in the county. And that is identified through CoStar, our third-party software that we use for office and commercial space in the county. The lease needed to be between 2,000 and 10,000 square feet. And then the applicant needed to provide the application within 90 days of signing the lease. So it's very simple, very straightforward. And then throughout the 7 years the program's run, the criteria have changed minorly to allow certain industries to be also included, such as breweries. And we've also increased the square footage from 10,000 to 20,000, although the maximum grant remains at $80,000. And we eliminated the county eliminated the 2,000 minimum square footage. Any square footage of lease between 0 and 20,000 is now allowed. Another change is that the Department of Economic Development obviously was privatized in 2015, so the Montgomery County Economic Development Corporation now does the business outreach engagement as well as the initial application and review before they forward it on to the county. So real quickly, a couple tables highlighted in the packet of the MOVE program's operation, as well as the county's Class A and Class B office vacancy. So since fiscal 15, the county has provided about 20 grants a year. Obviously, that includes pandemic years where we've had a little less attraction, but nonetheless, we provided about 20 grants a year for about a total of $600,000 per year in total expenditures, which averages about a $30,000 grant per applicant. We have attracted, based on the MOVE program, about 111 jobs each year. And on average, we, through the MOVE program, see about 80,000 square feet of Class A or B office space leased up. On Table 8, I provide the office vacancy between 2011 and 2021, based on CoStar for Class A and Class B office. And as you can see, our office vacancy has fluctuated between 10 and 11%. We did get into the 9s right before the pandemic. But on average, our vacancy rate has been about the same through the last 10 years. So in terms of program evaluation, council staff is providing the same evaluation for all EDF programs. As the name implies, and I apologize, I forgot, we've used the MOVE program for so long. The DED, when it was created, gave it the acronym Make Office Vacancy Extinct. And obviously the office vacancy rate hasn't changed much due to the program, partly just frankly, the amount of money that goes into the program is not enough to move the needle when you have several million of square feet of vacant office space. But it has clearly provided very easily understood and a grant for small businesses as they come to the county and as they relocate here or they start their business here. Whether that has provided economic activity that would not have otherwise happened, which is why the EDF or the Economic Development Fund exists, is pretty tenuous at best to say. Some of these probably were done anyway, regardless of the grant, and we provided easy access to first year funding so that the business could be able to grow or handle lease space. And then obviously, as similar to other programs, the actual new jobs based on our economic fiscal plan, fiscal tool suggests this program is breaking even like many of our other economic development fund programs. I'll just jump into the few areas that the council staff highlighted for potential changes should the committee want to discuss them today. Certainly, if the program remains unchanged, the council can continue to appropriate about $750,000 a year, more or less, depending on the needs of the budget, and continue to provide grants based on attraction, as we have been through the program for Class A and Class B office. Other areas where the committee could consider changes, as always, additional data reporting or outreach is always needed for all of these programs. Business engagement is super helpful as we meet a lot of businesses through the MOVE program that we might not have otherwise met. And certainly understanding more of how these businesses grow post-grant could be a great benefit to the county. And then, as always, for the two major changes the committee could consider is if office vacancy is the problem, we have different office vacancy rates throughout the county because we have submarkets. And so the council could consider focusing the MOVE program or a similar name program on office vacancy in specific areas of the county. As noted, the county executive in 2018 let me double check. Yeah, in fiscal 18 did recommend a similar program, which was just a bonus at $2 per square foot on top of the $8 per square foot. But certainly if the committee wanted to, they could focus all of the grant on office vacancy in specific submarkets of the county. Alternatively, if the attraction program is what's the most important, then the county council could consider other ways to measure success, not just leases or Class A or Class B office, and envision a new kind of attraction or small attraction grant program as kind of a sister or a companion program to the MOVE or as a new program. So with that, I will turn it back over to you, Mr. Reamer, and welcome any comments or discussion the committee wants to have.
Okay. I had a quick, I'd like to, Councilmember Friedson, I don't know if you had a comment or a question. I'd be happy to turn it to you. I have one quick question I wanted to start off with.
Go ahead. I did, but I mainly wanted to turn to MCDC and see if they had any thoughts on, the success of this program and changes that they, might be interested in pursuing. I think the broad question for me is, one, are we investing enough money? And if this is our goal, because it seems, part of the challenge is, perhaps if we need to move the needle, we're not moving it enough. And then is this the best investment of the $750,000, right? Is $750,000 the right number? And if our goal is to address office vacancy, which hasn't really moved, then either we're directing it in the wrong place or we're not spending enough to make the difference. And I think that ought to be something that we discuss, but I'd be happy to turn to MCDC if that's okay with you, Chair Reamer, and then probably have some other follow-up questions and comments as well.
Let's do that. I just had a quick clarifying question. My understanding is that the MOVE program is essentially an entitlement where if you qualify, you get it. That's accurate, right? So the fact that it's been 20, it's not because 30 applied and 10 of them were turned away. It's that 20.
It runs out of money. Right? I mean, isn't the issue that at a certain point,
Let's ask,
there's no money.
that's
Yeah.
finance about.
I'm asking for that. I'm following up on your clarification on that. Sorry.
Yeah, fine. Let's. Lori.
Sure. So we haven't really had years where we've run out of. There have been a couple of years where we have gotten we have spent the entire 750. If you recall, the EDF fund is actually an evergreen fund, so we do carry some rollover funds from previous years that we keep designated for those programs if they haven't been fully spent. So we have had a couple of years where we have actually spent the entire $750,000 that's appropriated for the program. But generally speaking, we don't have more applicants than we have funding available for. We are able to fund all those, and as you said, it is an entitlement program. So if it's the company's first commercial lease in the county, they sign a lease for 3 years at a minimum. And it's 20,000 square feet or less, then they qualify for the grant. So it's a fairly simple program. We have found, and certainly I'll let Ben and the MCEDC staff chime in on this as well, but we have found that this program kind of fills the need for companies who wouldn't otherwise qualify for one of the larger EDF grant and loan through the big EDF grant and loan program, because they're not going to hit, the job requirements or the capital expenditure requirement that we're looking at for some of those larger EDF grant and loan programs. But many of these small to mid-sized companies are very appreciative of the grants that they get through the MOVE program. And as you say, as an entitlement program, it's a fairly simple process for them. I think it's a great marketing tool that MCEDC uses when they're talking with prospects and potential new businesses moving into the county. And in my opinion, it works fairly well the way for the purpose that it was set up currently. So, but I'll turn that over.
Yeah, I've always loved how brokers can talk about it. It's a certain thing. They don't have to speculate as to whether a potential client could get it. They can really say, if you come here, you will get this. That seemed like a multiplier benefit, but I am definitely open to ideas about how it could be better, structured. So, Mr. Wu, welcome.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman and the members of the committee for your review of the MOVE program. First, let me say that we work very closely with the finance team over in the county executive's office. We do appreciate their leadership and their collaboration and partnership with the MOVE program, as well as in supporting our economic development efforts. Generally, let me say that we do find the MOVE program to be an effective tool in our attraction and retention arsenal. MCDC here today is joined also by our EVP, Bill Tompkins, and also our MOVE lead, Brad Stewart, who's the Senior Vice President for Business Development. So I want to recognize Brad.
Thanks, Ben. I appreciate it. And I'll provide the feedback to the questions that Councilmember Friedson asked, and you did also, Councilmember Reamer. I think Lori gave a great synopsis of that. And, for us, I look at this as a low bureaucracy, high value proposition. When we talk to, and you mentioned, Councilmember Reamer, certainty, that's always one of the challenges we face. And for those of us every day sort of working on EDF programs and those sorts of things, certainty is never something that comes into that discussion. It's always a very iterative, frequently painful process that is usually very lengthy in nature. And I think we find many people who question whether or not the reward is worth the pain and suffering that they may have to go through on the other side. With this, I can tell you that it is a very useful marketing tool. It's a very useful way to get companies to move into the county, which is its only use. These companies can't already be in Montgomery County. So we are attracting businesses from other locations, whether from DC, Virginia, or other parts of Maryland. I've had 2 applicants this morning, one coming from Virginia and one coming from DC. And so that's what this is a useful tool for us is to make it sort of lower the barrier of entry to people to come into Montgomery County and do business. It's something easily for them to understand what they would get, as they're sort of thinking through the cost of moving here and the cost of office space, those sorts of things. And for us, it creates a very important entry point for those types of businesses. To get to sort of the concept of this original intention of this program of making office vacancy extinct, I think Gene made some important points. Is this enough money to make a dent in such a huge amount of space that's available? No. The other part of it is, even though the percentage of office space that hasn't lessened, the percentage of it that's available hasn't lessened over the years. The other part of that is the supply has gone up. Every year there's more office space being built. And I think one of the things we see is that, that's staying relatively flat. New office buildings are coming up. Occupancy increases to match that demand. And so the vacancy rate stays relatively flat. So for us, it's a very useful tool. And I can tell you one of the good things about this program, because it's not as fixed from a legislative or rules perspective. We frequently have companies that or opportunities that fit into not a perfect box. And so it gives us an opportunity to work with finance, and they've been a wonderful partner of ours to sit down and sort of work through these changes, tweaks and other things like that to continue to refine the program to really help it meet our economic development needs.
Super. So I'll just start with a discussion topic. I mean, we have talked over the years about how could we focus it geographically, but to the earlier point, I mean, it's not like we're turning people away. So we could provide more of the resources towards companies that are willing to locate in a certain part of the county where we really want them to locate. But, it seems like that would be more relevant if we were turning people away. We considered a supplement that would allow us to say, well, if you'd consider, I don't know, let's just pick downtown Silver Spring. If you'd consider downtown Silver Spring, rather than maybe you were looking at Bethesda, we can give you a better incentive there. That is certainly an approach. I think the bigger question is any amount of money we could really do in this context going to move the needle for a company, versus all the other factors that they are considering, is that marginal increase of whatever it would be. I mean, what's your thought generally on how this could be tweaked, if at all, to address some of those ideas?
Well, I'll jump in and take the first shot at that and ask finance, Lori and Pete to add on afterwards, or disagree. The program works very well as it is, and again, we sit down and sort of work through ways to improve it. Certainly for us, when we talk about the MOVE program in relationship to the EDF program, there's a sort of stark jump from this $80,000 grant you can get to $80,001 as part of an EDF program. So, there is I think in a bigger context, trying to understand how to maybe better adjust where those breakpoints are and where they make sense in today's world is a fair discussion that's maybe not one we can answer now. To directly answer your question, Councilmember Reamer, it's an interesting concept, about sort of providing an additional or higher incentive for specific areas of the county. I do think it's possible that could make a difference in getting people to make a decision. As an example, the city of Rockville has a sort of a partner program to the MOVE program where they offer an additional amount of money per square foot for people who come into the city of Rockville. It's not fully funded, so it's not necessarily a guaranteed program the way the county's is. But if you were to think about the difference of a company thinking about Silver Spring or another part of the county that's more expensive, going from $8 to $12 a square foot might very well change that math for them quite significantly, because you've got two factors working for you, right? You've got a larger incentive on the front end, plus you've got lower rents on the other side. So that might very well have an impact on that.
Okay. Any comment?
So I don't disagree. And I was actually running ready when we started the Rockville MOVE program. And it actually, I think, did make a difference in some of the businesses who chose to locate inside the city of Rockville. to get that additional $4 a square foot that the city was offering. I'm just going to throw out something else that may be an issue if we choose to, do $12 a square foot in a targeted geography. Is according to county code, the finance director cannot make any grant awards above $100,000 without council approval. So you could potentially, if we're going to remove the $80,000 cap for some of these targeted geographies, we may run into the administrative issue of we would have to bring those MOVE grants in front of county council if they would end up being over $100,000. So I'm just going to throw that out as a potential additional administrative, and that would add to the layer of bureaucracy that Brad was so excited that we don't have with this program previously. So I'm just throwing that out for awareness purposes.
Yeah, that's important to keep that in mind. Gene?
Real quick, I was just going to say that we had, I appreciate Ms. Boyer's a note about that. We've had this conversation previously. So for the Small Business Assistance Program, which operated in Wheaton, a few businesses did receive more than the $100,000 threshold. Some of the conversation revolves around that threshold exists so the council is aware of grants or offers that the executive might make that they may not be aware of. Certainly if the council approves an appropriation for a purpose, one might argue that they've already been notified and understand how that grant might be applied. We could cross that bridge when we get there, but just wanted to note for historical purposes that the council has approved some of these EDF subprograms for greater than $100,000 without having additional review.
Correct. Yep.
Meaning the intent is for discretionary economic development fund programs, and this is a non-discretionary entitlement, so it would be different. This is a tricky one because on the one hand, I think that I am attracted to the lack of bureaucracy and the consistency and the ease of this. On the other hand, I'm not sure it's accomplishing the goal that we have set. To reduce or eliminate office vacancy, but it is accomplishing a lot of other goals that have been, talked about here. So my view would be, if there are tweaks, let's think about them and, let's discuss them. And I think we ought to be willing to, make some of the changes. Obviously this is an important tool that, the county is using, the Economic Development Corporation is using to, attract businesses to the county. And that's great. It isn't necessarily making a dent in the office vacancy number. And so I don't think that should be the focus of what we, say we're intending with this program. But if the focus is attraction and, making us competitive with Northern Virginia or with DC or with Frederick or with regional counterparts, then I think that ought to be what we look at and identify. And then maybe the $8 isn't the right number for that. Maybe it should be $12 across the board. And then maybe, we look at it that way. I just think the challenge that I have here is I understand the value and appreciate, what has been said here, but I think that the intention of what we are saying the goal is and what it's actually doing and why we actually like it are not necessarily aligned. And so this is an opportunity, I think, for a reset of the program to say, okay, what is our goal here? Our goal here really is about regional competitiveness. These are, we're not maybe attracting people from all over the world here with this small entitlement. There are other tools where we would be doing that. But for those companies that are deciding whether to locate and where to locate within the DC region, there are questions about, what is the cost per square foot and what is the value that you're getting in terms of your business, both for attracting employees, for attracting customers, for getting the type of talent that you want, et cetera. And this is slightly, marginally tweaking that value proposition. And I think the question should be, is it enough? And, are we, changing that balance to the degree that it should? To me, that's still an open question. I'm not convinced that the $8 per square foot is the right number. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but I think we should dive into that a little bit. And I think the second layer question of, is this a tool or should we layer on another tool where we focus on other areas? Because I do think, and I have had conversations with businesses where they have talked about Rockville and the difference between being just outside of Rockville and in Rockville. If you can get an additional support per square foot that is, maybe perhaps not exactly an entitlement because it might not be fully funded like the county's is, but close to it, that changes to a certain degree, or at least as part of the calculation that could potentially change that decision. So, I think this has been really helpful, at least for me, to understand what was our goal. Is that still our goal? Is there value here? I think the goal perhaps has changed. I think the value to me seems clear, that there's general consensus here that there is real value to having this program. And I think now we should reset the goal, have some metrics that reflect that goal, and then decide, do we have the right number? Is this the right level of support? And then if we don't have that right level of support, then, what is the funding amount that would be necessary in order to accomplish, what we want if we are going to raise the entitlement, perhaps. And then what are the metrics that we're going to look at? I think that we should always be looking at, what is that number based off of, per square foot number, based off of? Do we want it based on the difference of the average of here versus somewhere else to make it competitive? Do we want to make it based on some other metric? I'm not sure the answer to that, but I do think, it ought to be something that we look at, because, there should be future packets. Those packets should be identifying something, but I'm convinced after this conversation that office vacancy rates are not the appropriate metric. I think it was helpful that it was in this because that was the intention of the program. And so, I thank Gene Smith for your packet, but I think for moving forward, if we're saying that's not the primary goal here and that's not the primary objective anymore, it maybe was originally, but we've evolved from there, then I think we need to decide what that metric ought to be. And then we should be analyzing that and deciding, are we spending enough? Are we spending too much? Or should we not be spending any more? And should we repurpose those funds for moving forward?
Thank you. Gene, this is not as I recall, legislative program. In other words, MOVE wasn't created by law. It was created through administrative action, I think, on the executive branch side, kind of executive leg it. And the council can also modify it or expand it, the same, pending various restrictions. Like, for example, if I understood Lori correctly, we couldn't really increase it that much because there's a legislative requirement that, any appropriation over a certain size would have to be approved by the council, and pretty quickly you'd be bumping up against that. So we'd have to have legislation that would change that, perhaps just for this program or perhaps generally. So, you couldn't just do it in the budget. You'd have to have companion legislation that would implement it, if I'm understanding it correctly. But the idea of a geographic supplement, provided that the grantee was not exceeding that limit, which is it, what's the per square foot dollar amount of MOVE generally?
$8.
$8, you said? So if you're at 10,000 square feet, then you're 80,000 a year, right? And he said that's sort of the break point of where the council does not have to approve it. So
it's one time, just a point of clarification, it's not an annual gift amount, it's or entitlement amount. It's a one-time expenditure on the MOVE here. So you sign that commercial lease for those 10,000 square feet, you're eligible for the $80,000 if you check all the boxes that are necessary. And fortunately, there aren't that many boxes. Thank you, Lori. And then you get the $80,000, and that just helps on the front end to soften the cost of moving here. I mean, basically, is that accurate? I just don't want to get caught up in the annual amount.
Make office moving easier.
Think of it as a signing bonus.
Signing bonus. I mean, I think there's a lot of value in this. I do. I mean, I just, I know when I talk to anyone who is asking about how to find office space here, how to start a business here, I can always refer them to this program, and it immediately says, this county's got something for you, unless you're in a certain sector. And I think that has been the source of some of the, criticism over the years. And so, for example, we opened this up to the alcohol manufacturing sector, and we got results. So I would certainly enjoy exploring a geographic supplement, through the budget process. It sounds like we could potentially add funding, and say this is for a certain geography or certain geographies. And then if the council were to approve that, the executive branch could readily implement a supplement without much challenge, it sounds to me like. So I don't know. I think that's something to consider, whether there are certain markets where, I'm just talking off the top of my head, where we feel like we're, we could have some more momentum. Like if we could just get some critical mass going, we'd start, this thing would start rolling. That seems like
Could we get some guidance perhaps, and maybe there could be some work in MCDC can help think through this, but is it an area that the office vacancies are below a certain rate? I mean, that's no longer our goal, but it could be a metric that is used to determine the geographic areas. Could it be equity emphasis areas? Could it be, opportunity zones? I mean, I'm not sure how we determine that. It probably should it exclude or include the city of Rockville that has its own program, for instance? I mean, I think that there's a lot to work out. I agree with you. I'm convinced that the original purpose of this program is not what we're using it for and not why it's valuable, but I'm convinced that it's valuable.
Yeah.
And so, I think that that's.
There might have been some overstatement in the.
There's a long distance between extinguish and like no movement. But I get the broader point. But it really isn't about office vacancy. It's about attraction. And it's about competitiveness, and those are different things. I mean, they're both incredibly important, and they have some relationship to one another. But those are different things. They require different metrics and different analysis and different, policy prioritization. And we should be looking at them, in a different way. I'm just afraid if we keep that as the metric and the standard for this, then it will look differently than this conversation, that the program isn't accomplishing its objective. And I think the objective has changed, and we should. We should state that, but I also think that we ought to look at not just the, supplement in particular areas, which I think should be part of it. We should look at, is the $8 the right number? And then separately from that, I mean, you either can increase, not to exceed $100,000, which certainly limits it, but it could still help for certain, for certain groups, because there's two caps. There's the 80,000 cap and the the other, so that's the question, is like, is the $8 correct? And then separately from that, to your point, do we need a bill that speaks, I think, to non-discretionary entitlements that exceed 100,000? Because that is definitely something that we could take a look at. I mean, maybe it's already handled and that's the intent of the bill, and we can just move forward with that, but maybe we need to have a bill, leading up to the budget that, addresses authority on explicitly appropriated funds for non-discretionary programs, or entitlements, where the executive can exceed. It just has to do a quarterly report or a monthly report, or of those, where there's no approval. That is required. So we don't add to the bureaucracy, but we accomplish the same intent of the council's, awareness of, appropriation of funds.
So if I could try to summarize what I'm hearing from the committee relative to the question about the add-ons or ways in which we can enhance the program. Especially in what might be targeted communities that would either be underrepresented or underserved. I would offer that MCDC could be helpful to the committee and to the council in trying to identify those corridors because it must be very hard having to go through the political process of trying to designate what those are, and also they may be malleable or interchangeable as the years go by, and having a statutorily imposed set of communities might be difficult to achieve consensus. What I would also suggest is that MCDC could help inform the council, or the council could give the authority to MCDs working in consultation with the executive branch, not necessarily in targeted communities, specific targeted communities, but perhaps in areas that MCDC identifies and reports back to the council in corridors that would be ripe for additional enhancements within the MOVE program. For example, the Purple Line, trying to support Purple Line development within those communities. Also, one of our key priority areas is on life sciences and helping to attract as much additional square footage that we can have for laboratory space. Right now, we have 10.6 million square feet of laboratory space with only a 5% vacancy. But we know, given the great work that Brad and his team are doing, is that we're attracting a number of terrific opportunities that will enhance by thousands the job growth, which we hope to be able to announce very shortly. And that this demand surge needs to be met. So MCDC could play a helpful role to the committee and to the council in identifying those areas of potential enhancement rather than trying to identify jurisdictional boundaries that could be politically difficult to come to consensus with.
It's great comment, great observation. I think we would, I'd like to ask you for that. Councilmember Friedson, raise your hand.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. One, I had mentioned MCDC. I think it could be helpful in helping us develop this. I do think a couple of things. One, the biohealth piece, while I think is critical, I think there's the opposite issue there. We don't have enough. I'm not sure this program can help that, because we have a lack of inventory of available space. I mean, 5% is not healthy. We should have a higher percentage so that we have, lab space, wet lab space in particular, ready to be filled by the hundreds of billions of dollars of investment around the world that is happening in bio. We want to make sure as much of it is happening here. I think that we might need a separate, focus on that. We're obviously doing a lot, as you know, based on all the efforts that MCDC and Brad in particular and the rest of the team are doing with the zoning text amendment that we have on accelerating biohealth. I mean, there's a number of areas, obviously, that we're working on this. I do think the Purple Line corridor is a very interesting one. I think that ought to be explored. Perhaps that's the area that we really focus on and add the enhancement. It's a key area. There's a number of concerns about displacement. I think there's major policy prerogatives that that would align to very nicely. The only other thing that I would say is everything about this has to be non-discretionary. So like the whole secret sauce of this program, what everybody has said in this conversation is about the non-discretionary nature of it. So if we do add an enhancement, that layer has to be crystal clear. So it has to be, within a half mile of the Purple Line or a mile of the Purple Line or in a equity emphasis area as defined by the Council of Governments or in an opportunity zone as determined by the state. I mean, it has to be for the broker, as Chair Reamer noted earlier, to be able to tell their client, it's got to be, it is or it ain't, right? I mean, it's got to be a binary situation, not, hey, let me check, I'm not sure. It's a little nuanced and complicated, or maybe it changed last year after some new report came out. I think if we're going to go in the direction of having the enhancement has to be consistent and it has to be obvious and it has to be something that we're not making a political decision about year in and year out and picking one community over another. If we have to take something that is designated already in some form or fashion or some area and just stick to that for an overarching policy prerogative. But I think it would be helpful for MCDC to help think through that and decide and make a recommendation of what you think would be most impactful. And I think MCDC could really help in this question of, is $8 the right number? What the enhancement would be? How can we make this program that you think is a helpful tool in your toolkit? How can we make it even more impactful? And at what point, is that right balance of, getting the greatest return for our economic development dollar?
All right. So just to reiterate, the council can adjust this program in the budget process. So if we wanted, for example, to add $250,000 to move for 2 priorities, that are enhancements above what the existing grant is, we could do that just by adding that to the budget during the budget process. The executive branch would have some implementation regulation, but it does not require legislation unless the grantee would exceed the cap of $100,000 in a year, which, I think we can, for the long term, maybe we should explore whether that's something to change. But for the short term, it sounds like it's more of unless you really want to make the dollar awarded larger, it doesn't sound like it's as much of a concern. If you want to make the amount awarded larger, yeah, you would have to change that. And there is a whole separate question as to whether the county and the state together are competitive in our incentives. And that is a bigger topic that we also have to delve into, because from what I understand, we're not. That the cost of business here is higher and our grants are lower in general than our competitors in the region. So that's a big one. But for this purpose, I think we could ask MCEDC to, when we take up move in the budget, which would presumably be in April, have some ideas for us that we could act on, at least, to take various steps forward. Gene?
And that's understood. I was just going to say, included with that, we can speak with the county attorney and also have our attorneys look at this whole $100,000 issue threshold. Like, does it require a law change, or is it simply, as Mr. Friedson's noted, since it's an entitlement program, the council understands the entitlement and is approving appropriation for the purpose of that entitlement? Does that actually not require any? Does the $100,000 threshold even matter at that point? So I think what I can do is make sure that happens as part of the review. And I was going to summarize, I think the other 2 things to hear from, for your comments and Mr. Friedson's, is $8 the right amount? And then what's the additional add-ons, if at all? And to your question, certainly executive and council staff can work with MCDC to have that information prepared with the budget. I would just say that it might be helpful to have that information prior to the budget meeting so that everyone understands if there's a new application per se, because it's not going to be in county code, what those materials are. So it's part of the budget process. But just wanted to add that legal thought. I think we can get information pretty quickly about how that would work so that this $100,000 threshold doesn't feel like it's a rock that needs to be moved if it isn't.
And just briefly to close out, what about other industries? What I mentioned earlier, we expanded it to local alcohol manufacturing, and that has been something to use. Ben, you had mentioned that, you thought maybe life sciences, there could be a targeted program. Are there some other industries that you think where we could build out a supplement to help us with recruitment or, with supporting locally expanding businesses?
Thank you, Chairman. I take very well Councilmember Friedson's point about how, thanks to his bill on the ZTA as well as other activities, we're actually doing quite fine in trying to address the demand surge in life sciences. So maybe priorities should be given in other industry sectors. The Connecting the Dots report, which our economic advisory panel had recommended, targeted 2 other opportunity to win industry that would give us a global and national standing. They included quantum as well as hospitality, especially hospitality tech. So those could be offered as alternatives if we're looking at support specific industry sectors.
Can I just make a suggestion? I don't want to water this down too much. I agree with that wholeheartedly, but I think that we should have a separate, rather than taking this program and expanding it and complicating. I think that the secret sauce is in its simplicity, and I think we should stick to that. could we charge, and if there's disagreement here, I'll respect that, but I think it would be helpful if we had a targeted attraction entitlement program, that is separate from it. It could be an add-on as well, right? Perhaps it makes sense to not be eligible for both, and perhaps it makes sense to be eligible for both, quite intentionally. This would be, an add-on if you're in a core industry like quantum, like hospitality, like, whatever the target industries that is recommended to us and that we ultimately agree to appropriate. But I would be interested in having a separate program for that, determining, what is the appropriate amount, what is the type of incentive. I think we could do a more intentional, targeted focus on what we want and how much, would actually move the needle if we do it that way, and we could focus it as much or as little as possible. At least, I think the report that you mentioned, which ultimately will probably be, I would expect, part of the comprehensive economic development strategic plan that the council, takes up. There are going to be specific targeted industries that we, formally approved, that you are already working on, and that we've, all been working, towards. And I think having a specific, separate program for that is simple, that is straightforward, that doesn't have a whole lot of, bureaucracy, but does move the needle for those particular industries. Because I do think, to a certain extent, bio is different, as we just, talked about. I don't know that it's as apropos to what this program really is, focused on. I don't know a whole lot about quantum. I'm not smart enough to understand that industry as much as I wish I did, but I'm sure, the needs of that industry are different. And hospitality is, based on the pandemic and otherwise, is changing rapidly. Hospitality tech is a huge area of opportunity where the county could be, a real leader in. So, well, I would love to see kind of two separate tracks here, if possible, on a targeted industry, appropriation and/or program, and then enhancements and improvements to move, if that would be amenable to everybody else.
Well, I appreciate that suggestion, and we certainly do want to pursue a further conversation with the committee and the council on those opportunity to win industries. So if we need to apply that on a separate track and not complicate it with MOVE, we can certainly do that. But we look forward to that conversation as well.
So the advantage of MOVE is that it is hooked to things that are easily quantifiable. It's a lease, and it's a per square foot dollar amount on the lease. There's all these mechanisms in place to implement it. Could you do an entitlement program for a quantum sector per job? Sure, maybe, but then you've got a whole question about, how do you actually enforce it, and how do people get it? I mean, I'm not saying that wouldn't also work, but it would be a whole separate system you'd have to build. So I think I definitely like the idea of exploring what those could be, but I do think we should ask MCEDC to give us some ideas about how to companionize the MOVE program with certain priorities that we might want to develop, more momentum in, just strategic opportunities. And then, if those two don't have to be mutually exclusive. So, to Councilmember Friedson, to your comment, like, sure, we could design some alternative type of programs that are like entitlements, in various sectors. But, if we could pursue,
Yeah, I'm just suggesting, all I'm saying is I'm afraid that the whole secret sauce that has been discussed here today is the simplicity of this program. And if we're already layering on some type of geographic prioritization,
well, I think
then we're going to layer on priority industry prioritization. Like, eventually we're going to layer on so many things that we are going to strip from the secret sauce from the program. And that's what I'm a little bit, afraid of. If you add $4 if you're in a priority area, and you add another $4 per square foot if you're in a priority industry, and you add $2 if you accomplish some other public, policy priority. To me, I think it would be easier if you had the MOVE program, if there was a separate program, some other form of entitlement that is just as simple and just as clear, but is focused and targeted And you say, if you're a quantum program, you're entitled to the MOOC program like everybody else. And there's also the, the LEAP program or the quantum, or the Smarter Than Andrew Friedson program or whatever. And you're entitled to that too. And it's part of the package that could be shopped and enhanced. It's no different really than if you come to Rockville, you're entitled to the Rockville one potentially if it's funded, and you're entitled to the county one, which I don't think having two accounts is the problem, or two places where you can get some money. I think it's when the rules are complicated, the application process is complicated. That's where, and to your point, Chair Reamer, when it's not, based on a lease and square footage, that is a very easy calculation. Lori's team spends, a limited amount of time having to review, again, you either are or you ain't, right? You either, qualify or you don't. So I'm just a little afraid of adding too many layers. The secret of this is that it's a very basic dessert.
Brad?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chairman Reamer. I appreciate you bringing up the idea of how we might attract other industries, because I think an honest reflection on the program is we see a pretty wide diversity of the types of businesses that apply for the MOVE grant. Some of those are personal and professional services, which probably have a fairly limited impact on the county. They may improve quality of life in certain areas or offer services or things like that, but not necessarily are going to grow and expand and become, second stage economic development projects. So I do think that's an important question for us to think about, whatever the mechanism is. And Councilmember Friedson made a point earlier. This actually does work on an international basis. In the last year, we've had several companies in the life sciences industry in particular who've chosen to put their U.S. headquarters here in Montgomery County and utilize the MOVE program. It's not enough to have the ability to help them outfit a lab or anything like that, but it is enough to consider them to establish their beachhead here in Montgomery County and sort of make their cost equitable where it makes more sense for them to be here than in Howard County or somewhere else where they could have less rent and be physically adjacent to their peers.
Yeah, I appreciate that clarification. I was just raising the point that I think that was probably not the difference of choosing between here and Shanghai. I think they probably chose to come to the DC region, and within the DC region, it made us a little bit more competitive on top of every other asset that we are, selling, which we have a lot to sell in Montgomery County. But I think it's an important point that, to your point, that it is part of the tool in your toolkit as you attract companies to Montgomery County from the region and within the region and beyond who are coming to the region. We want them to locate here. That having that slight competitive benefit is significant. Based on the data, what I've seen, to me, I think the idea that this program is fairly general is part of its benefit. Personally, I do think that is part of it. I think that I'm a little afraid of overly complicating it. I think that we should layer on top of it another program that targets, and it could be very similar, but I think that as simple as we can make this program and as simple as we can make another program, and if you want to layer two very simple programs on top of each other, the best dessert for me is a chocolate chip cookie with a scoop of vanilla ice cream on top. I think you start putting a lot of other stuff in the cookie and you start putting a lot of other stuff in the ice cream and you ruin what was already pretty damn good. Now, the ice cream was good, the cookie is good, together they're better. I think people can understand that personally. But that's just my preference. And I think if you come back and have ideas and there are ideas that make sense, that would make it simple and easy, I don't think there's a philosophy to that. I just think I don't want to lose what is the real benefit that's been shared here today.
Okay.
And certainly none of us want to lose that either.
Oh, yeah, exactly. I think we're in agreement there. And I think I would like to hear MCDC's recommendations for some options to expand the program and to be strategic in so doing, and even welcome reforming what we do as a base, but certainly, more easily. And I to the sunset program, it might be worth any enhancements that we might consider would be sunsetted, just to make clear we're thinking sort of not experimentally here, but we're thinking in terms of critical urgent needs or something like that. Gene?
I think you. So I just texted to help summarize because I believe there's a 1:30 meeting you all need to get to. We'll work with executive staff and council staff. We'll work with EDC. I'll handle the legal stuff for those questions, but we can come back hopefully before the budget, so that when the budget comes over, it's given the limited amount of time the committee has with all the budget items, you'll have seen this prior to that, but we'll follow up later.
Well, I haven't seen Councilmember Friedson eating despite all his talk about ice cream and cookies, and I know he probably is as hungry as I am. So we'll end this meeting here before we return as the Joint Committee in a few minutes for what will probably be a long session. So I'm going to contact council staff and ask that we start that at 1:45. All right. Thank you very much, everyone. Good meeting.
Great conversation. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.